we are going to, you can either do it for musculoskeletal or nerve. We're gonna go musculoskeletal because we're not gonna actually be driving needles. We're just gonna be mapping the back. And it's gonna set us up at about 8 centimeters of depth, which I can tell you her epidural space is not gonna be at 8 centimeters of depth. We got time. Ish. All right, so if I'm feeling for her iliac crest right here, what line does that denote?
Tophier's line.
I heard somebody say it.
That was me.
There you go.
Let me take credit for that.
Tophier's line, right? So that'll be one of those PIP questions that some of your senior aides are going to ask you because it's an older term. But that's going to relatively put you in the neighborhood, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to orient my curvilinear probe to where the left side of the probe is the left side of the screen, right side of the probe is the right side of the screen. I'm going to come over her spine right here, and we are looking for bony structures, right? So I'm going to turn my gain way up, get rid of my gain in the near field because really we're just looking for bony structures. And so what I'm looking for here is I'm looking for spinous processes and transverse processes. So right here, this is the image I call the ghost man image, right? So I'm looking at the body of a vertebra. So I see the spinous process right here, complete dropout down below that. I see the shoulders, that's the lamina on either side. And so you kind of get this like eerie ghost man figure right there in that orientation. So that tells me I'm looking over the body of the vertebra. So what I want to do is I want to go down and find S1. So, because actively, if you're looking to do an epidural, you actively want to avoid the L5-S1 interspace usually. And do you know why that is? Do y'all remember? It's because the ligamentum flavum at the L5-S1 interspace is just quintessentially like incredibly thin. You may have 1 or 2 clicks through there, and you're going to end up wet tapped so frequently if you end up L5-S1. Now, the L5-S1 is great, and they call it, actually has a name called the Taylor approach. Y'all get that lecture? It's called the Taylor approach because it is the largest window that you have, right? If you're talking about windows and you're just trying to do a spinal. So if I have somebody that's like coming in for hip or knee surgery, these old grandmas that are got terrible rheumatoid arthritis, like you know that their spaces are almost non-existent between like 4-5, 3-4, 2-3, something like that, I'll do a Taylor approach between L5-S1. But if I'm doing, you know, your epidural, I'm going to actively try to avoid that space. So I'm going to come down. Oh, there's my next ghost man image. I know I started here, so that was probably 4 I'm looking at. I'm assuming this is probably 5. Well, let's go all the way down until we see that nice flat image. So notice the difference when we're looking at this. You see the spinous process of the sacrum is so much smaller, right? It doesn't stand up nice and tall like a regular L5. L4, L3, L2, anything like that. And notice how the shape is much flatter right here, right? So it's a much flatter approach. So then I'm going to come up and I'm going to say, okay, well right here I can clearly see ligamentum flavum right there, this hard calcified ligament right there in the center. As I come up, now we got that good ghost man image, so there's L5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pen or marking pen or whatever, sterile pen, and I'm going to mark center line. I'm going to put my center line. You can actually set your center line up. That center line on the screen is the same center line that you have right here on your probe. I can actually take a marking pen and mark my center line right there, okay? I'm then gonna continue to come up cephalad. Oh, there we go. We got ligamentum flavum right there. Beautiful, I can see it. If my ultrasound probe is about 1.5 millimeters wide, and your 17 gauge 2E needle is just about 1.5 millimeters wide as well. So if my probe can see the ligamentum flavum, that means my needle can get to the ligamentum flavum as well. So now that I have 5 oriented, there's L5-S1 interspace. I can see ligamentum flavum nice and clear. I'm going to take my marking pen and I'm going to mark out here on the side. Then I'm going to come up to L4. There's our ghost man image right there. I'm going to find my center, mark center there. Come up 1 more interspace. There's our ligamentum flavum. Boom, I'm going to mark over here on the sides. And I'm going to come all the way up to my ghost man image at L3. And I'm going to mark midline right there. So I end up with, so what you're going to end up with is you're going to end up with a mark, a mark, a mark, and then off to the side, one side or the other, you're going to end up with a mark on either side, right? And so what happens is you basically have a little bullseye, a little X marks the spot of where you're going to go. Now, on her, I can clearly feel that interspace there, so it's not a big deal on her. She's nice and thin. The primary place that I use this for is on my OB ladies that are 250, 350 and above, right, to find that space. Because not only am I going to then have my targeted here, I'm gonna be able to find ligamentum flavum. So let's say that's ligamentum flavum. I'm also going to be able to freeze that image. I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna actually measure from the bottom of my probe to ligamentum flavum is about 5.5-ish centimeters on her, right? Now, that being said, at 5.5 centimeters, I'm not gonna start using my loss of resistance syringe at 2 centimeters, right? Because I'm likely to just create a false void and just end up with a false loss. I'm gonna probably drive my needle down until I'm 4.5 or 5, and that's around the time you should start to feel that engagement of the ligamentum flavum into your TUI needle. This will help you avoid those false losses, passing the catheter into a false void, all that kind of stuff. The other thing to think about is that it's going to tell you how, do I need to select my standard 9 centimeter needle, or do I need to go up to the 12 centimeter or the 15 centimeter needle to be able to get there, right? The last measurement that you're going to be able to do is when I'm looking at ligamentum flavum right here, I'm going to be paying attention to the orientation that my probe is at, right? So if my probe is at this angle, that's the same angle that my needle needs to take to be able to get there. But in the lumbar region, it's going to be relatively 90 degrees. So this works really well with your heavyset folks. It works really well if you get, we do a lot of epidurals for our prostate seeds and prostate HDRs. And so these old crusty guys that are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, they may not have interspaces. You may not be able to get an epidural on them because you physically can't fit your needle in between the vertebra because the vertebra have either collapsed down on themselves or you have enough arthritis that, you know, those gnarly growth bits that are on your vertebra itself, that they've actually closed that window down. So this is another useful tool for that. The third useful is actually probably been the most impactful to my practice is on our scoliosis folks, right? And so what you'll hear, a lot of the stories that you hear is like, I came in for my first baby, it took them 3 providers and over an hour to get my epidural and it just never set up right. It was this traumatizing experience. And this was the first time that I used this for a scoliosis patient, which is why I continually always tell the story. So she had her second baby, no epidural, just grit her teeth and had her baby naturally. She had a large gap in between baby number 2 and baby number 3, and she was coming in for her third baby and was like, you know, she was older, she's like, listen, I really want an epidural, I don't want to have my second experience, my first experience was terrible,